Charging issues, 2010 Buick Enclave. This started about 4 weeks ago. The original alternator, we got about 130,000 miles in this car. Was intermittently charging, so we decided, hey, time for alternator. Which is not a fun job, but definitely doable. I would say there's, you can take it out without pulling everything apart. You know, get this reservoir loosened up so you can push it out of the way. That's going to stop you from pulling that pig out of here. You don't have to remove the battery box. This is my third time installing an alternator, and I'll explain why here in a moment. But basically that motor mount is exactly where it was. There was a bolt I had to pull out of that motor mount on the side here, and there's another bolt just below there that holds the alternator in, and of course the two nuts in the front. And then of course we had to take out the radiator reservoir, which is a couple nuts here, and then a AC line which bolts on. Just kind of push that out of the way. But yeah, you can definitely pull it out without having to tear this whole thing apart too much. It's not impossible by any means. But anyways, back to the alternator issue. This car is gonna see its fourth alternator from the original alternator. So that was the original, and then 2 replacement rebuilds from Advanced Auto Parts, and then the fourth one is going to be one I pulled from a junkyard. So to start this all out, what we did is we put the first reman alternator from Advanced Auto Parts into this car. And it lasted for about a day and a half, I would say. And then all of a sudden the warning bells were going off in the car and the battery wasn't charging, and sure enough we put the meter on the battery terminals, and it was just diving. There's no output coming from that alternator at all whatsoever. The first thing I did is blame this connector, which I replaced because there was some corrosion on it. Because I'm like, well, you know, maybe it's this connector, and this connector actually gets wired through a wiring harness right to the car's computer, the ECM right there. And I blamed it, so I replaced it. We had it all taped up nice. Since then, the tape's been stripped off for testing reasons. And so we replaced that. And I went to the auto parts store and asked to exchange that reman alternator they sold me for a second reman alternator, and they said they didn't have one in stock. So I went down the road to another location and got a second CarQuest reman alternator. Now, this is the second reman alternator in this car within a week of the first one that I put in there. Okay. So number 2, I figured, okay, we just got a bad alternator. Let's just swap it out and put another one in, right? Second reman alternator, new plug, and it lasted for about 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden the warning bells are going off again, and there's no charge. So I'm thinking, there's no way in heck that it's an alternator issue. I mean, the alternator, in my head, I'm thinking there's no way that 2 reman alternators are gonna go bad within a week of each other after the original was in there. So I did some digging around and decided to do a continuity check. We're gonna check the continuity from the end of this plug here, which gets wired all the way to the ECM. And I found the electrical prints online and did a continuity check, and we're good. The wiring is good all the way to the alternator. We decided to also ensure that we were getting a good ground to the alternator. So I grabbed some jumper cables, clamped the jumper cable on the ground of the alternator to the ground of the car, then tried to right to the ground post. Couldn't get a charge out of the alternator. Then I was like, well, maybe there is an issue with the cable that goes from the battery to the alternator, and that has a fusible link inside of it. So maybe there's something issue with that. So I decided to take the lead from the jumper cable and go from the battery post, next to my battery box, and jumper directly to the output post on the alternator. Still couldn't get the alternator to charge. So we know it's not a ground. We know it's not a battery cable going to the alternator, fusible link issue. Kind of jumper across all that. And I'm thinking, well, you know, these newer cars being more of a smart alternator is what I call them, smart alternators, being that, you know, these ECMs, the computer of the engine, is actually telling the alternator what to do, as far as you can tell the alternator to freewheel and not make any power when it needs to, if you're hammering down on the gas pedal. Or if there's not a lot of load, you know, you're not running your power seats, you know, don't produce a lot of power and engine drag at the same time. But if you are turning all your electronics and all that stuff on, then it tells the alternator to make a lot more power to replenish the battery. So there's a lot of control there. So I was thinking, well, maybe it's the ECM, the car's computer, that is failing to produce a signal to the alternator to charge. And I'm not a car mechanic by any means. I'm just kind of like your backyard mechanic type of guy. So I decided, hey, what's the cheapest way I can replace this ECM and reprogram it? Well, the ECM cost me about 45 bucks at a junkyard, but it ended up costing me 200 bucks to have someone program it. And the mechanic that did the reprogramming of this ECM, to get this replacement ECM in here, he called me up and said, well, I got the ECM reprogrammed, but your alternator's still not charging. And he said that when he was checking his status sheets, that they've been having tons of issues with reman alternators failing in for these engines, these cars. So that kind of reinforced the fact that, hey, you know, I probably need to look at the alternator again. And I didn't want to. I'm fighting the fact that I just can't believe that 2 reman alternators are going to fail. Especially, I purchased them from 2 different locations. In my mind, if you know there's a guy sleeping on the job and he's doing some bad stuff on the alternators at the factory, and you got a bad batch at the store, I picked up the second alternator at a different store. So I'm thinking, what's the chances? What's the chances there's 2 bad alternators in this car? So, and that's kind of why I did all the retesting, the new connector, you know, having the ECM, replace the ECM, reprogrammed it, blah, blah. Just trying to prove the fact that it's not the alternator. Well, we're back at looking at the alternator again. So after 2 remans failed, I went to the junkyard and I'm like, well, I still can't believe it. So I went to the junkyard and I got a replacement alternator. This is a GM AC Delco factory original alternator. And yeah, I don't know if this is even any good, but I'd imagine they didn't park the car at the junkyard because the alternator died. I imagine it was in an accident or something like that. So I'm gonna assume that this is good. So what I'm thinking is that if I pop this thing in there and all of a sudden it's charging my battery again, then I'm kind of leaning towards the fact that, you know, we have a bad, you know, we had an alternator issue the whole time. So this issue is getting kind of really old, but I'm trying to like narrow down where does the problem come from, and I've been just kicking myself trying to say, you know, it's not the alternator, there's no way. But this little guy here hopefully is going to prove me wrong and say, yeah, it was the reman alternators the whole time. The CarQuest brand remans were just failing miserably, and just don't. So that's kind of what I'm trying to prove to myself right now. So I'm going to put this GM AC Delco alternator in my car and see if we get a charge out of it. If we do, then we know who to blame. CarQuest reman alternators. And that's entirely why I'm making this video, to hopefully help somebody out that's going to go through this daunting task of ripping that thing out of here. That they don't put something else in there that's going to be junk, I guess. But and I know I'm putting a used one in there, and if it gets me 6 months or a year and it goes out, you know what? At least I know what the root cause was, and I'd have no problem spending the $400 or $500 putting a factory original back in this car at that point in time. But right now I'm just trying to narrow things down here after all this tests and all this money spent, just to make sure that what is the root cause of the failures of these alternators. So there you have it. I'll let you know what I find out soon. For the moment of truth, we got the alternator from the junkyard, which is a GM factory alternator. It's a used one, but just trying to prove something here. Got the battery hooked up just now, so you hear the dinging going on. So basically what I was trying to prove is that, if that alternator starts charging, it has nothing to do with the two-wire plug going to the ECM, has nothing to do with the ECM, has nothing to do with any other engine codes that might be preventing the ECM from wanting to charge the battery. So if this thing charges, it's basically narrowing it down to the alternator itself. That's kind of where we're at. So let's see what happens. And right there, the very right gauge, you can see we got some power in the battery. I had it charge a little bit, so let's see what happens. And look at there. That is charging. That is not 12 volts from my battery charger. That is 13, 14 plus volts coming from the alternator, charging my battery. So that is something I have not had. And the alternator is definitely charging the battery at this moment. So I guess really what this does is proves the point that the alternator is the core problem of the issue that I've been having with this whole time, and I just want to share that. So reman alternators, I'd second guess them, and I'm really disappointed in the CarQuest alternators, the rebuilds. I think the true test will be, I'm going to run this for, obviously I'm going to run it. So I'm going to drive this car as long as I can. I'm definitely going to post a video if there is an issue where this alternator prematurely fails, like it has with the first two. But so far we're getting a good charge out of the alternator, and I'm happy. And I'm kind of disappointed in the fact that I just wasted a lot of money on doing a lot of extra stuff when it was quite unnecessary. So, but let's just baby steps. Let's see what this alternator does for the next couple weeks, and so on, and I'll repost a follow-up video from there. So. Okay, wrapping up that alternator job. It was kind of a nightmare from the previous videos that I made about that, and I just wanted to kind of give you a recap. It's been about a month, probably a month exactly from when I did it, and the car's been running great. I haven't had any alternator issues, no charging issues. So I guess that just kind of proves the point. Like I said before, it was definitely the reman alternator was the issue. 2 alternators in a row failed. So obviously I would stay away from those. Just spend the extra bucks, put a GM factory replacement alternator in your car, especially for this particular vehicle or vehicles that are similar with the engine style and whatnot. And yeah, just wanted to share that last tidbit, and hopefully this helped you make a decision on what alternator to buy, and hopefully you're not going to make the same mistake I did. There you go.